The message came at 3:47 in the morning, ship time. Admiral Park Do-hoon was sleeping in his cabin aboard the UN's Gwanggaedo when the emergency alarm pulled him from his dreams. He had been dreaming of his home in Bizen, of the sea and the sound of waves. But the alarm was louder than any ocean. He reached the bridge in less than 2 minutes. His crew was already at their stations, their faces pale in the blue light of the screens. Lieutenant Yoon-hana stood at the communications console, her hand shaking as she worked the controls. "Admiral," she said, and her voice broke on the word. "New Bizen, the colony. Something has happened." Park Do-hoon felt his stomach turn cold. New Bizen was humanity's jewel in the Kepler system. Over 2 million people lived there. Families, children, schools and hospitals and parks filled with laughter. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be far from any danger. "Show me," he said. The main screen flickered to life. At first, Park could not understand what he was seeing. The image was broken and unclear, filled with static and fire. Then the picture became sharp, and he wished it had stayed broken forever. The city was burning. Buildings that had stood for decades were now nothing but ruins. Ships hung in the sky above the colony, but they were not human ships. They were crystalline and sharp, like weapons made of ice and light. The Velith. Park knew their ships from intelligence reports. They were an old empire, ancient and proud. They had never shown interest in humanity before. Now they were killing everyone. The footage showed people running through the streets, mothers carrying children, old men falling as they tried to escape. The Velith weapons did not make sounds in the recording, but Park could imagine the screams. He could imagine the fear. He could imagine the moment when hope died in every human heart on that world. "How long ago?" he asked. 6 hours, Lieutenant Yoon answered. Her eyes were wet, but she did not cry. "Not yet. The signal was delayed." "Admiral, my sister lives there. She has 3 children. I need to know if they—" She could not finish the sentence. Park Do-hoon ordered the fleet to maximum speed. Every ship under his command pushed their engines past the safety limits. Crews worked without rest. Nobody spoke except when necessary. They all knew what they would find, but they refused to believe it. The journey took 4 days. 4 days of silence and fear and prayer. 4 days of watching the clock and counting the hours. 4 days of hoping that somehow, impossibly, there would be survivors. There were no survivors. When the fleet arrived at New Bizen, they found a dead world. The atmosphere was thick with smoke and ash. The cities were gone. The forests were gone. The lakes and rivers were gone, turned to steam by weapons that humanity had never seen before. Search teams went down to the surface in protective suits. They walked through the ruins, looking for any sign of life. They found only bodies. Millions of bodies. Men and women and children, frozen in their final moments of terror. Captain Yoon-hana led one of the search teams. She walked through the remains of the neighborhood where her sister had lived. She found the house, or what was left of it. The walls were broken. The roof was gone. Inside, she found toys scattered on the floor. A child's drawing on the wall, half burned but still visible. It showed a family, a mother, a father, 3 small figures with big smiles. She fell to her knees in the ashes and finally let herself cry. The data cores were the only thing that survived. They were designed to withstand anything, sealed in underground vaults that the Velith weapons had not reached. When the technicians opened them and played the recordings, Park Do-hoon gathered his officers to watch. They saw everything. The Velith had come without warning. No demands. No communication. No chance to surrender or flee. They simply appeared in the sky and began their work. The recordings showed families hiding in basements, holding each other as the world burned above them. Children asking their parents why this was happening. Parents with no answers to give. One recording showed a school. The children were in the middle of a lesson when the first explosions shook the building. The teacher, a young woman with kind eyes, tried to keep them calm. She told them everything would be fine. She told them help was coming. She held them close as the ceiling collapsed. Park Do-hoon watched until he could not watch anymore. Then he walked to his private quarters and sat in the darkness for a very long time. The news reached Earth within days. Every screen on every world showed the footage. People gathered in streets and homes, watching in horror as their worst fears came true. The galaxy was not empty, and it was not friendly. President Kang Tai-woo called an emergency session of the United Earth Council. Representatives from every nation came to Geneva. They filled the great chamber, sitting in silence as they waited for their leader to speak. President Kang was an old man, but his back was straight and his voice was strong. He had spent his life working for peace. He had believed that humanity's future lay in cooperation and understanding. Now he stood at the podium with ashes in his heart. For 300 years, he began, humanity has walked among the stars with open hands. We reached out to every species we met. We offered trade. We offered friendship. We offered peace. We asked only for the same in return. He paused and looked at the faces around him. Grief and anger and fear, all mixed together. The Velith gave us their answer. They came to New Bizen without warning. They killed our people without mercy. They murdered children in their schools. They burned old men and women in their homes. They destroyed everything we built and everyone we loved. His hands gripped the podium until his knuckles turned white. We sent them messages of peace. They sent us death. We offered them our hand. They cut it off. President Kang looked directly into the cameras. His eyes were hard now, harder than anyone had ever seen them. For 300 years, we have been civilized. We have been kind. We have been patient. We have followed rules that our enemies do not even understand. He took a deep breath. No more. From this day forward, we cease to be civilized. We will find the Velith. We will make them pay for every life they took. And we will teach the galaxy that humanity is not prey. The chamber erupted in a roar that shook the walls. Representatives stood and shouted their approval. Fists pumped in the air. Tears streamed down faces that had never known such rage. The vote was taken immediately. Every nation agreed. Every voice said yes. Earth was going to war. And this time, there would be no mercy. Across human space, the message spread like fire. Factories began to shift their production. Scientists opened sealed files. Soldiers reported for duty. Ships that had carried cargo now carried weapons. Captain Yoon Hana returned from New Bizen with a small box. Inside was a child's drawing, half burned and covered in ash. She kept it in her quarters, above her bed, where she could see it every night. It reminded her why she would fight. It reminded her what had been taken. And it reminded her that some things could never be forgiven. The stars had witnessed a massacre. Now they would witness something far more terrible. Humanity's answer was coming. Deep beneath the mountains of the moon, there was a place that did not exist on any map. It had been built 100 years ago by people who feared the worst. They hoped it would never be needed. They prayed that humanity would never become desperate enough to open its doors. General Bay. Ji-won walked through those doors for the first time on a cold morning in March. She was a small woman with gray hair and calm eyes, but her mind was sharper than any blade. For 30 years, she had built Earth's defenses. She had designed strategies for wars that never came. She had prepared for enemies that never attacked. Now the enemy was real. And she was ready. The underground base was called Site Zero. Its corridors stretched for miles beneath the lunar surface. Its vaults held secrets that would make the galaxy tremble. Files marked Last Resort lined the walls, sealed with codes that only the highest leaders knew. General Bay gathered her commanders in the main briefing room. They were the best minds in human military history. Admirals and generals, scientists and engineers, all brought together for a single purpose. "The Vala think they know us," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "They have watched us for decades. They have studied our technology, our tactics, our behavior. They saw a young species, soft, peaceful, easy to destroy." She pressed a button, and the wall behind her lit up with images. Ancient battlefields, burning cities, weapons that humanity had used against itself before reaching the stars. They do not know our history. They do not know what we did to each other before we became kind. They do not know what sleeps in our past. The images changed. Now they showed blueprints and designs, weapons and systems that had never been built. Technologies too terrible for any sane civilization to use. Until now, we kept these things locked away. Ethics committees, safety protocols, laws written by people who believed war was behind us. General Bay's eyes swept across the room. Those restrictions are lifted. Every limit is removed. Every weapon is approved. We will use everything we have. Engineer Cho Yoonji received her orders the same day. She was a brilliant woman who had spent her career designing medical equipment and hospital systems. She had saved thousands of lives through her work. Now she was asked to take them. The military gave her a team of 500 engineers and scientists. They took over a shipyard in orbit around Mars and began their work. Cargo vessels were torn apart and rebuilt as warships. Engines that had carried food and medicine now powered weapons of terrible destruction. Cho Yoonji worked 18 hours a day, sometimes more. She slept on a cot in her office and ate meals at her desk. Her hands built things that kept her awake at night, things that whispered in her dreams. The gravity shear cannon was her first creation. It bent space itself into a weapon, tearing enemy ships apart at the molecular level. Nothing could shield against it. Nothing could survive it. The antimatter cluster munitions came next. Each warhead carried enough destructive power to vaporize a small moon. They were designed to overwhelm any defense through sheer numbers. Hundreds of warheads for every target. And then there were the nanite swarms. Tiny machines, smaller than dust, programmed to consume metal and plastic and flesh. They could destroy a city in hours, eating everything until nothing remained. Cho Yoonji finished her work and looked at what she had built. She did not feel proud. She felt sick. But she remembered the images from New Bizen. She remembered the children in that school. And she kept working. Across human space, the transformation was happening everywhere. Peaceful worlds became factories of war. Cities that had never known violence now trained soldiers by the thousand. Scientists who had studied medicine and agriculture now studied destruction and death. Lieutenant Song Minho was 24 years old when the war began. He had joined the Navy to see the stars, to explore new worlds, to protect the colonies he loved. Now he sat in a simulator, learning to kill. His training cohort had started with 50 pilots. Within a month, there were 5,000. Within 2 months, there were 50,000. They came from every corner of human space. Young men and women who had never held weapons, now learning to wage war. The simulators were not gentle. They showed what real combat looked like. They showed ships exploding and crews dying. They showed the faces of enemies as they burned. The scores were not measured in points. They were measured in projected kills. "Sir," Song asked his instructor one day, "How far are we willing to go?" The instructor was an old man who had lost his wife and children on New Bizen. His eyes were empty of everything except purpose. "Until they beg us to stop," he said. "And then we keep going." The military academies changed their teachings. Old books about honor and mercy were put away. New lessons focused on efficiency and brutality. The goal was not victory. The goal was extinction. On Earth, volunteers lined up outside recruitment centers by the millions. Old soldiers who had retired decades ago came back to service. Young people who had never known war demanded to fight. Mothers and fathers who had lost children on New Bizen swore oaths of vengeance. The United Earth Council met every day, approving new weapons and new strategies. They argued about nothing. Every proposal passed. Every idea was funded. Every limit was removed. President Kang Tai-woo signed order after order, each one darker than the last. He did not sleep anymore. He could not close his eyes without seeing the footage from New Bizen. He could not rest until the debt was paid. Admiral Park Do-hoon was given command of the new fleet. His ships were monsters now, bristling with weapons that would have horrified any peaceful civilization. He walked through his flagship and did not recognize it. The Gwanggaeto had been a vessel of exploration. Now it was a beast of war. Captain Yoon Hana was promoted and given her own ship. She named it New Bizen after the world that had died. Every member of her crew had lost someone in the massacre. They did not need orders to fight. They needed orders to stop. The intelligence services worked day and night, mapping Vela space and finding targets. They learned the locations of military bases and supply lines. They found weaknesses in the enemy's defenses. They prepared the ground for invasion. General Bae Ji-won reviewed the final plans in her office beneath the moon. The screen showed human fleets gathering at the border. More ships than any species had ever assembled. They would strike in waves, overwhelming the enemy through force and fury. "They think they won," she said to herself. "They think New Bizen was the end of us. They do not understand what they woke up." She pressed the button that would send the orders to the fleet. Now they will learn. In the darkness of space, human ships began to move. Their engines glowed like angry stars. Their weapons charged with power that could crack worlds. Their crews stood ready, hearts full of rage and grief. The Velith Dominion had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 1,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species. They had never known defeat. They were about to meet humanity. And humanity was no longer civilized. The Velith fortress world of Desser Prime floated in the cold darkness of space like a jewel of war. Its surface was covered with military bases and weapons platforms. 300 orbital stations circled it like a crown of steel. A fleet of 1,000 warships stood guard, their crystalline hulls shining in the light of the distant sun. 40 million Vela soldiers called this world home. They were the pride of the Dominion, trained from birth to fight and conquer. They had never known defeat. They believed themselves invincible. Admiral Park Do-hoon studied the tactical display on the bridge of the Gwanggaeto. His fleet waited at the edge of the system, hidden behind a cloud of asteroids. 200 human warships, each one a monster of destruction, each one crewed by men and women hungry for vengeance. "Admiral," said his tactical officer, "Commander Osanwoo, the Velith fleet is moving to intercept. They outnumber us 5-1. Park nodded slowly. "Good. Let them come." Captain Yoon Hana commanded the vanguard from the bridge of the New Bizen. She watched the enemy ships approach on her screen, their formations perfect, their movements confident. They had crushed 100 species across 1,000 years. They expected this battle to be easy. She pressed the fleet communication button. "All ships," she said, her voice cold and steady. "Weapons free. No quarter. No prisoners. The human fleet surged forward like a pack of wolves. The Velith commander was named Varak the Mighty. He had destroyed civilizations. He had broken empires. He watched the small human fleet approach and felt nothing but contempt. "These creatures are desperate," he told his officers. "They throw themselves at us like insects. We will crush them and take their worlds for the Dominion." He did not understand what was about to happen. The first gravity shear cannon fired from the Guangato. The weapon bent space itself, creating a wave of pure destruction that cut through the Velith formation like a blade through paper. 3 cruisers vanished in an instant, torn apart at the molecular level. Their crews did not even have time to scream. Vorak stared at his display in disbelief. Those ships had been among the strongest in his fleet. They had shields and armor that could withstand any known weapon. Now they were dust floating in space. "What? What is that weapon?" he demanded. No one could answer him. The antimatter cluster munitions came next. Human ships launched hundreds of warheads in a single wave, each one carrying enough power to crack a planet. The Velith point defense systems tried to shoot them down, but there were too many. For every warhead destroyed, 10 more took its place. Explosions lit up the darkness of space like a second sun. Velith ships disappeared in flashes of terrible light. Their shields meant nothing. Their armor meant nothing. They died by the dozens, by the hundreds, faster than anyone could count. Commander Osunwu watched from his tactical station as the enemy fleet began to break apart. Ships that had been advancing now turned to flee. Formations that had been perfect now collapsed into chaos. "They're running," he said. Admiral Park's face showed no emotion. "No, they're not." He pressed a button on his console, and across the system, quantum jammers activated. These devices created a field that blocked all faster than light travel. Every jump drive in the sector died. Every escape route closed. The Velith fleet was trapped. "Hunt them down," Park ordered. "Leave nothing alive." Captain Yunhana led the pursuit. Her ship moved with impossible speed, its eye systems linking with every other vessel in the fleet. They did not fight as individuals. They fought as one creature, one predator, one terrible engine of destruction. The Velith tried to fight back. Their weapons struck human shields and bounced away. Their missiles were intercepted before they could reach their targets. Their desperate attacks meant nothing against an enemy that had spent months preparing for this moment. Vorak the Mighty watched his fleet die around him. His flagship shook as weapons struck its hull. Alarms screamed. Fires burned. His officers ran back and forth, trying to save what could not be saved. "Signal our surrender," he commanded. "Tell them we yield. Tell them we will pay any price for peace." The communication officer tried to send the message. A human ship destroyed the antenna before the first word could leave. There would be no surrender. There would be no mercy. The Guangato closed on the Velith flagship. Admiral Park looked at the damaged vessel on his screen. Inside were thousands of beings who had probably never been to New Bizen. They were soldiers following orders. They were people with families and hopes and dreams. He thought about the children in that school. He thought about the families in those basements. He thought about Captain Yoon's nieces and nephews, burned alive without warning or reason. "Fire all weapons," he said. The Velith flagship exploded in a ball of fire and light. Vorak the Mighty died without understanding what had happened, without understanding that humanity was no longer playing by rules that the Velith had never followed. When the space battle ended, not a single Velith ship remained. The debris of 1,000 vessels floated in the darkness, a graveyard of crystal and steel. Human ships moved through the wreckage, making sure nothing survived. Then came the ground assault. Drop pods fell from human ships like rain. Soldiers in black armor descended on Nesser Prime, their faces hidden behind blank helmets. They carried weapons that burned and shattered and dissolved. They carried raves that had been building since New Bizen. The Veloth defenders fought hard. They held their positions and launched counterattacks. They were brave and skilled and determined. It did not matter. Human soldiers pushed through every defense. They took no prisoners. They showed no mercy. They moved through military bases and command centers, leaving only silence behind them. General Bei Jiwan received reports from the front lines every hour. The numbers were terrible. 40 million Veloth soldiers eliminated. 0 human prisoners taken. She nodded and issued new orders. Make sure every recording reaches the Veloth homeworld, she said. They need to see what happens when they attack humanity. They need to understand what we are willing to do. The footage spread across Veloth space within days. Other species intercepted the transmissions and watched in horror. They had always thought of humans as young and weak, a species that could be ignored or pushed aside. Now they saw the truth. The Veloth had poked a sleeping beast, and the beast had awakened with fire in its eyes and blood on its claws. Captain Yunhana walked through the ruins of a Veloth command center on Desser Prime. The bodies of defenders lay everywhere, frozen in their final moments. She felt nothing. No satisfaction. No guilt. Just emptiness. She thought about her sister. She thought about the children who would never grow up. She thought about all the things that had been taken from her. This was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was a start. She looked up at the sky, where human ships orbited like hungry wolves. The Veloth Dominion stretched across dozens of star systems. There were billions of enemies still to face. This was just the first lesson, she said to no one. We have many more to teach. The war was just beginning, and humanity was ready to burn the galaxy if that was what it took to make sure New Bizen was never forgotten. Never forgiven. Never repeated. The Veloth Dominion had ruled their sector of the galaxy for 3,000 years. They had built an empire on the bones of conquered species. They had grown fat and proud on the wealth of stolen worlds. They had never known fear. Now fear spread through their empire like a disease. High, Sovereign Moltric sat on his throne in the capital city of Ethkar. His palace was a mountain of crystal and gold, built to show the power of the Dominion. For centuries, his ancestors had ruled from this place. Receiving tribute from 100 worlds. Now he received only reports of death. Desser Prime has fallen, said his advisor, a thin creature with trembling hands. The entire garrison. 40 million soldiers, gone. Moltric gripped the arms of his throne until his claws left marks in the metal. How? We had the strongest fleet in the sector. We had the best warriors in the Dominion. The humans? The advisor whispered. They came with weapons we have never seen. They fought without mercy. They took no prisoners. The High Sovereign had ordered the attack on New Bizen himself. The humans were a young species, weak and foolish. He had thought destroying one of their colonies would teach them to submit. He had thought they would beg for peace. He had been wrong. The human fleets did not stop after Desser Prime. They moved through Veloth space like fire through dry grass. Colony worlds burned. Military stations were destroyed. Supply lines were cut. Every system they touched became a grave. Admiral Park Dahan led the main assault force. His fleet had grown from 200 ships to 500, then to 1,000. Volunteers from every corner of human space demanded to join the war. They wanted revenge. They wanted blood. They wanted the Veloth to suffer as humanity had suffered. Captain Yunhana commanded the strike force that hit the Veloth shipyards. These factories built the warships that had destroyed New Bizen. She did not destroy them quickly. She destroyed them slowly, making sure the workers had time to understand what was happening, making sure they knew why they were dying. She told herself it was justice. She told herself it was necessary. She did not think about what she was becoming. Commander Jisu was different. She had been a schoolteacher before the war, before her students died in their classroom on New Bizin. Now she commanded a ground assault unit, leading soldiers through the ruins of Velith cities. She watched her troops work and felt sick inside. They were efficient and brutal. They killed everyone they found, soldiers and civilians alike. They burned buildings and destroyed monuments. They left nothing standing. Is this what we want to be? She asked herself at night, lying in her quarters and staring at the ceiling. Is this who we are now? She had no answers, only orders. On Earth, scientist Han Yuri worked in a laboratory that had once designed medicine. Now it designed something else. Something terrible. She had spent her career trying to save lives. She had developed treatments for diseases that killed millions. She had believed in the power of science to heal and help. Now, she created a weapon that would haunt her forever. The biological agent was simple in design but devastating in effect. It attacked Velith biology at the genetic level, spreading through air and water and touch. It could not be stopped by medicine. It could not be cured by treatment. It killed slowly, over days, giving the infected time to spread it to others. Han Yuri presented her work to the War Council with empty eyes. We can end this war quickly, she said. Or we can let it continue for years while more of our people die. The council voted. Every hand rose. The weapon was deployed on 12 Velith worlds. Within weeks, the populations began to sicken. Within months, they began to die. Billions of lives ended in fever and pain, crying out for help that would never come. Han Yuri watched the reports and felt nothing. She had already lost the ability to feel. High Sovereign Moltric grew desperate. He sent diplomats to human space, offering peace and tribute. The humans returned their bodies in pieces. He sent fleets to defend his remaining worlds. The humans destroyed them without effort. He sent messages begging for mercy. The humans did not reply. Finally, he recorded a transmission himself. He appeared on every screen in human space, his face drawn with fear and exhaustion. Creatures of Earth, he said, I beg you to stop. We were wrong to attack your colony. We were wrong to kill your people. Please, tell us what you want. Tell us how to end this war. We will give you anything. Admiral Park Doan recorded his response. You showed our children no mercy, he said, his voice flat and cold. Now learn what mercy costs. The human fleets pushed deeper into Velith space. They did not stop for negotiations. They did not pause for discussion. They advanced and destroyed, and advanced again. The other species of the galaxy watched in horror. They had always thought of humans as young and harmless. They had dismissed humanity as a minor power, not worth attention or respect. Now they saw what humans could become when pushed too far. They saw weapons that could crack planets. They saw soldiers that fought without fear. They saw a species that had abandoned all limits in pursuit of vengeance. Many of those species had considered expanding into human territory. They quietly abandoned those plans. Many had thought about testing human defenses. They erased those thoughts from their minds. Captain Yoon Hanna led the final assault on the Velith core worlds. Her ship, the New Bizan, cut through enemy defenses like a knife through water. Her crew fought with silent fury, each one carrying the weight of personal loss. The Velith capital, Ethkar, fell after 3 days of battle. Human soldiers stormed the Crystal Palace. They found High Sovereign Moltric hiding in his throne room, surrounded by guards who could not protect him. He tried to speak. He tried to bargain. He tried to offer whatever the humans wanted. The soldiers did not listen. They had orders. They had purpose. They had grief that burned like fire in their hearts. Commander Mjisu was there when Moltric died. She watched his eyes go empty and felt something break inside her. She had wanted this. She had dreamed of this. She had believed that killing the leaders who ordered the attack on New Bizin would bring her peace, that it did not bring peace. It brought only more emptiness. She walked out of the palace and looked up at the burning sky. The Velith capital was in flames. The empire was falling. The war was almost over, and Mjisu realized that she did not know who she was anymore. The teacher who loved her students was gone. The person who believed in kindness and mercy was gone. In their place was something harder and colder, something that had learned to do terrible things without hesitation. We won, she said to herself. But what did we become? The Velith Dominion surrendered unconditionally. Their military was destroyed. Their population was decimated. Their empire was reduced to a handful of quarantined worlds under permanent human supervision. The war was over, but the cost was only beginning to be counted. The war ended on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. The final Velith transmission arrived at the United Earth Council at 9:47 a.m., offering complete and unconditional surrender. The empire that had ruled for 3,000 years had fallen in 18 months. President Kan Tai-Wu received the news in his office. He sat alone at his desk, staring at the message on his screen. His hands did not shake. His face did not change. He had lost the ability to feel joy or relief long ago. He had won. Humanity had won. The Velith would never threaten Earth again. And it had only cost them their souls. The celebration spread across human space. People filled the streets of every city, cheering and crying and embracing each other. They had been afraid for so long. They had lost so much. Now they were safe. Now they were victorious. But some did not celebrate. Some sat in quiet rooms and stared at walls and tried to remember who they had been before the war. Admiral Park Do-hun resigned his commission the day the surrender was announced. He had led humanity through its darkest hour. He had done things that would haunt him forever. He could not carry that weight anymore. He returned to Earth and bought a small farm in the countryside outside. So, he planted vegetables and raised chickens and tried to find peace in the simple work of growing things. He never spoke of the war. He never acknowledged the medals or honors. When journalists came to interview him, he turned them away without words. Sometimes, late at night, he would sit on his porch and look up at the stars. He would think about the lives he had taken. He would think about the orders he had given. He would wonder if there had been another way, a path that did not lead through so much blood. He never found an answer. Captain Yunhana stayed in the military, but she was not the same person who had watched her sister's home burn on New Bizin. She commanded her ship with perfect efficiency. She followed orders without question. She never smiled. She never laughed. She never let anyone get close to her. The child's drawing still hung above her bed, half-burned and covered in ash. She looked at it every night before she closed her eyes. She looked at it every morning when she woke up. It reminded her of what she had lost. It reminded her of what she had become. It reminded her that some wounds never heal, no matter how much time passes. General Bei Jiwan retired to a quiet house on the moon, far from the eyes of journalists and historians. She spent her final years writing a document that she sealed and locked away, to be opened only after her death. The memoir began with a single line: "We proved we could become monsters." The challenge now is remembering how to be human again. She wrote about the decisions she had made, the weapons she had approved, the lives she had ordered destroyed. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not make excuses. She simply told the truth as clearly and honestly as she could. When she died, the document was released to the public. It became the most read book in human history. People needed to understand what had happened. They needed to know the cost of their survival. Scientist Han Yuri lived the longest of all the war leaders. She returned to medicine after the war, trying to atone for the weapon she had created. She developed treatments that saved millions of lives. She trained doctors who healed instead of harmed. She worked until her body could not work anymore. But she never forgave herself. Every night, she dreamed of the Velith worlds where her weapon had spread. She dreamed of children coughing and dying. She dreamed of families holding each other as the sickness took them. She had done what was necessary. She had helped end the war quickly. She had saved human lives. And she had killed billions. Commander M. Jisu returned to teaching. She found a small school on a colony world and spent her remaining years working with children. She was gentle and patient and kind. The way she had been before the war changed her. But sometimes, when the students asked about her past, her eyes would go distant. She would remember the things she had done, the orders she had followed, the person she had become. She would remember the enemies she had killed and the friends she had lost. "I was a soldier once," she would say. "I did things that I am not proud of. But I am trying to be better now." The children did not understand. They had been born after the war. They had never known fear. They had never seen death. And Jizu hoped they never would. President Kang Tai-woo gave one final address to the United Earth Council before he retired. He stood at the podium where he had declared war, looking older than his years, carrying the weight of every decision he had made. "We won," he said, his voice quiet and tired. "We did what was necessary to survive, to avenge our dead, to ensure that this would never happen again." He paused and looked at his hands. The hands that had signed orders for genocide, for biological warfare, for atrocities that matched and exceeded those committed against New Bizen. But we should not celebrate. We should not take pride in what we became. We proved that humanity can be the most terrible force in the universe when pushed too far. He looked up at the representatives gathered before him. Many of them had voted for the war. Many of them had approved the weapons. Many of them had demanded vengeance. Now we must find our way back. We must remember the values we abandoned. We must rebuild the civilization we destroyed in ourselves. It will not be easy. It may take generations. But if we do not try, then the Velith will have won after all. The galactic community awarded humanity a permanent seat on their governing council. Not because they respected human culture or admired human diplomacy. They gave humans a seat because they were afraid. They had watched what happened to the Velith. They had seen the weapons and the strategies and the terrible efficiency. They knew that humanity was willing to go further than any other species. They knew that pushing humans too far meant facing something that would not stop until the threat was eliminated. It was not respect. It was fear. And perhaps that was what humans had wanted all along. On the anniversary of the attack on New Bizen, a memorial was built on the dead world. It was a simple structure, just a wall of stone with names carved into it. 2.3 million names. Every person who had died in the massacre. People came from across human space to visit. They brought flowers and photographs and memories. They stood before the wall and cried and remembered. Captain Yoon Hana came every year. She would find the names of her sister and her nieces and nephews. She would touch the carved letters with her fingers. She would stand in silence for hours. She never spoke to the other visitors. She never shared her grief. She carried it alone, the way she carried everything now. The memorial had an inscription at its base, words chosen by the survivors, in memory of those we lost, in warning to those who would harm us, in hope that we never become this again. The stars were safe. Humanity had made them so. The cost was everything they had believed about themselves. Decades later, historians would debate the war and its consequences. Some said humanity had done what was necessary. Some said humanity had gone too far. Some said there had been no other choice. Some said there was always another choice. But all of them agreed on one thing. Humanity had learned something about itself in those 18 months. It had learned that beneath the civilization and the kindness and the rules, there was something older and darker. Something that could be unleashed when the need was great enough. Something that was best left sleeping. The children born after the war grew up in a galaxy that feared their species. They were taught about the massacre and the vengeance that followed. They were told that humanity had done terrible things for understandable reasons. Some of them were proud. Some of them were ashamed. Some of them did not know what to feel. But all of them understood the lesson. Humanity could be the best of things, kind and creative and full of wonder. Or it could be the worst of things, terrible and ruthless and without mercy. The choice was always there. It would always be there, and every generation would have to make it for themselves. On the farm outside Seoul, Admiral Park Do-eun spent his final day in the garden. He was old now, his hair white, his hands slow. But he still found peace in the soil, in the growing things, in the simple rhythms of life. As the sun set, he sat on his porch and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the ruins of the Velith Empire floated in the darkness. Somewhere out there, the graves of billions marked humanity's passage. He closed his eyes and thought about the teacher he had been, the officer he had become, the monster he had let himself be. "I hope you understand," he whispered to no one. "I hope you forgive us. I hope we forgive ourselves." The stars did not answer. They never did. But somewhere, in the hearts of the humans who had survived, a small light still burned. A hope that they could be better. A determination to never forget what they had done and never repeat it. The war was over. The healing had only just begun.